Ah yes, what a thing of beauty. Well, the design language on the C8 is debatable, but the engine is a Ferrari slang masterpiece. The all-new, all-aluminum, flat-plane, 5.5-liter LT6 has officially been unleashed on the world. It's a complete clean sheet design built bespoke for the C8 Z06. And it's, without a doubt, the most impressive production engine to ever come out of America.
It's the cheapest brand new supercar you can buy, and it's absolutely eating all the other supercars for lunch. In fact, the new Z06, and specifically the LT6 that powers it, has put the entire automotive industry on notice. 670 naturally aspirated horsepower, twin 86mm throttle bodies, titanium connecting rods, and a volumetric efficiency of over 100%. This ain't your daddy's small block anymore. I'm Trav, and this is Launch Control. Let's get into it.
What makes a Z06 a Z06? Is it the improved handling? How about the extra stopping power? Or maybe it's the bodywork and aero. Perhaps it's the combination of all of the above. But for me, there's always been one standout feature.
The engine.
What started as a secret package you could scribble in on the order form with the second generation Corvette was turned into a standalone model in the 90s with the C5.
And as good as that car is, and it is, we had one, what really shook the world was what lied underneath the hood. That's right, folks, the legendary LS.
GM's LS1 engine was a 5.7-liter small block made entirely out of aluminum. It's lightweight, it's powerful, it's plentiful, and most of all, it's dead reliable.
And real quick, no, your 2006 Silverado does not have an LS. It's very similar to an LS, but for one, it's made out of cast iron and not aluminum. It uses a different camshaft, and you know what? This video isn't about the LS. We'll make one diving into that engine family very soon. Today, we're talking LT6.
When GM sat down to design the latest high-performance power plant for the new C8 Corvette, they knew things were changing in a big way. It's almost hard to believe, but the LT6 started development all the way back in 2014. It's been nearly 10 years since they first put pen to paper, and as a team made the choice to not only go mid-engine with the new Corvette, but to bring an entirely new arsenal of firepower to the fight with the Z06.
Going mid-engine came with its own set of challenges and constraints, but it opened up the possibility to do something they could never do with Corvette before. Aside from the C4ZR1, but that's an engine to cover another time. It allowed them to make the move to overhead cams.
What?
Let me explain. Since the 60s, Corvette has always been synonymous with their classic sort of wedge shape. The front of the car is always pretty low to the ground, and the top of the hood is about as tall as Brad's kneecap. There isn't a ton of height available for the engine, and that's important to note. See, pushrod engines have their drawbacks. They have a ton of advantages too, don't get me wrong. But aside from the mechanical simplicity, the biggest benefit is how much shorter you can make them, because the camshaft lives right in the heart of the block. That means the cylinder heads can be pretty short. It also means you can keep the majority of the engine's weight down low, which obviously improves the car's center of gravity and helps with handling. There are less moving parts, which means less to go wrong. And pushrod engines are known for making big torque, but aren't nearly as capable of turning high RPMs. Guys, we could do an entire launch control on overhead cams versus pushrods. And if that's something you want to see, well, let me know down in the comments. For the purposes of today's video, which focuses on the LT6, let me just give the most basic explanation I can.
With a pushrod engine, you have a chain or a small gear set that runs between the crankshaft and the camshaft, which, again, lives down low in the valley of the block. The camshaft acts on the pushrods, which in turn push up on the rocker arms, which lever open the intake and exhaust valves.
Pretty simple, right? With overhead cams, you've got at least one camshaft per bank that lives on top or overhead the combustion chambers and valves. The cams are much further away from the crankshaft, so we've got to use a much longer chain or set of chains to get them spinning. And that means tensioners, guides, and rails to go right along with it. Those extra camshafts and variable valve actuators that are often part of the equation all add complexity and rotational mass to the valve train, but eliminate the reciprocating mass we get with pushrods. It's that reciprocating action that's the #1 reason pushrod engines have a harder time spinning past 6,500 RPM or so. Also, because the pushrods live in the valley and extrude up past the cylinder heads, they take up valuable space that could be otherwise used for larger intake ports. Not a big deal when you add forced induction, but to make huge naturally aspirated power, not ideal.
With the LT6, big, naturally aspirated power was the goal. And since an engine's output is directly correlated to how much air we can move through it, double overhead cams were a logical move.
Unless they wanted to build a properly massive engine like Dodge did with the Viper. The LT6 uses a completely mechanical finger-style valve train, which means no hydraulic lifters, and they've coated the friction surfaces in a diamond-like coating, or DLC, which, coupled with the cast iron valve seats, they claim the double-sprung titanium intake and sodium-filled exhaust valves will never need adjustment once they're set at the factory. As for the bottom end, the crankshaft is forged steel, the connecting rods are forged titanium, and the pistons are forged aluminum. The crankcase houses a total of 7 pumps. One main supply pump for the main bearings, rod bearings, all 4 camshafts, and the engine oil squirters, and 6 scavenge pumps, which force oil back towards the remote-mounted oil reservoir and supply pump. The crankcase itself is held under a constant 80 kPa of vacuum to help reduce windage losses created when the crank is forced to spin through the usual air-oil mix present in most engines. There's only ever about a half quart of oil, or around 500 milliliters, circulating through the engine at any given time, even at maximum RPM. The other 9.5 quarts live in the cooling circuit and the reservoir. And all that means the oil stays cool, and it won't lose oil pressure even when subjected to over 2.5 Gs of lateral force. Onto the flat plane crankshaft. What the hell does flat plane even mean?
Let's use a 4-cylinder engine for this example. In a typical combustion engine, there are only 2 types of crankshaft used. Cross-plane, which means the crankshaft journals are positioned on 2 different planes, offset by 90 degrees, and flat plane, which means the crankshaft journals all exist on the same, or flat, plane. Instead of the pistons staggered in a way that one of them will be at top dead center every 90 degrees like you get with a cross-plane, you get a design that lands you with a set of pistons at top dead center every 180 degrees.
Couple main advantages and disadvantages here. Cross-plane cranks result in substantially improved engine balance, which means less secondary vibration. Also, because of the way they're set up, a cross-plane V8 gives us that awesome, lopey muscle car burble. And maybe most importantly, they allow for better bottom end or lower RPM torque, thanks to the higher frequency of a firing cylinder.
The downsides, though, are much heavier crankshafts due to the larger counterweights required. And those bigger weights not only take more time to spin up and down, but they need more physical space to exist in, which means you need a larger crankcase as well. The flat plane design is lighter, more compact, much more responsive, and by nature offers better exhaust scavenging. The lighter weight rotational inertia combined with the more even firing events and improved flow means engines with these cranks like to spin much faster and get that rotation done more quickly.
The downsides being lower torque output, especially at lower RPMs, and increased engine vibration. The vibration is a big one. Flat plane engines are known for literally shaking themselves apart. In fact, with the LT6, GM had to change the spin-on style oil filter that's usually mounted right to the block to a cartridge style unit remote mounted on rubber dampers, just to keep the thing from unscrewing itself. During testing, they found that a specific displacement of 5.5 liters gave them enough low-end torque that drivers wouldn't be disappointed. I'm looking at you, E90 M3, and a small enough mass that the natural vibrations induced from the flat plane crank could be properly managed. The engine itself weighs just 475 pounds, has a compression ratio of 12.5 to 1, and a bore-to-stroke ratio of 1.25 to 1. The added height afforded by the mid-engine placement grants us the space to use the most advanced intake system on an American car to date. Probably.
Each cylinder uses a dedicated trumpet-style runner that's specifically tuned for maximum airflow and harmonic resonance. There are 3 separate crossover valves that move incrementally depending on engine RPM and load.
All that means this engine sports a volumetric efficiency of 110%. It literally breathes more air than it has the physical displacement to allow, which means it's almost like it's got its own little baby supercharger. There are only a handful of cars ever built that pull that off.
And every single one of them is hand-built and takes over 3 hours to assemble. The shims for the valve train are measured and picked robotically, and the bottom end bearings are each hand-selected to ensure the most perfect fit possible. And each and every one gets a 20-minute long break-in session on an engine dyno before being bolted into a car.
And that's not exactly how GM's other engines are put together. All of them have 54 separate rockets stamped, etched, and cast right in as a throwback to its internal development name, Project Gemini, which is Latin for twins.
Twins, Basil, twins.
Which itself is a throwback to NASA's Gemini space program, which only carried 2 astronauts on each mission. Twin cams, twin valve springs, twin throttle bodies, twin fuel pumps, twin intake plenums. You get it. Both high-pressure fuel pumps live in the valley and supply the hot side fuel injectors with up to 5,000 psi of fuel pressure. That hot side injector trick, they learned that during development of their engines used in IndyCar. And they run on a state-of-the-art 65-volt electrical architecture, powered by a Bosch-made 32-bit engine controller. If you don't speak computer, just know that that's a lot of processing power for something as seemingly simple as an engine control module. If you follow racing, you've actually seen this engine in action already. It's what lies in the heart of the C8R. You know, the actual factory race car you can see out turning laps at the IMSA GT Le Mans class. But get this, in the street car, it makes more power. A full 170 more horsepower to be exact. But that all comes down to racing regulations. So, it's monstrously powerful, ultra responsive, and it screams like a banshee. It's way more Ferrari 458 than classic Corvette. And thanks to the trick reverse megaphone exhaust tips, it sounds just as good inside as it does to the rest of the world outside. That's our deep dive into the LT6. If you liked this video, well, get subscribed and turn on the notification bell, because we're bringing you a new launch control vid just like this every single week. In fact, next week, because you all asked for it, we're talking 4G63. Go check out some of our other videos right over here. If you love cars, we've got something for everyone. Thanks for watching, people. I'll see you all next time here on Ideal.